Beethoven's 32nd Piano Sonata in C minor, opus 111, is a major important work in the piano repertoire. His last three sonatas are often grouped together as one entity, composed around the same time in 1820 to 22, and in them Beethoven refines his music into transcendence. Opus 111 holds a special place because it was the last piano sonata Beethoven wrote, so it's his farewell to the piano sonata genre. It has only two movements. The first one is a typical Beethoven angry Allegro in C minor, and the second movement is like the opposite of that, an open arietta with variations in C major. And there the struggle from the first movement is over and we are rewarded with celestial bliss. So the two movements form a pair of several opposites and dualities: minor and major, Allegro and Adagio, earth and heaven, struggle and stasis. What strikes me the most with Beethoven's late style, that this is the refined technique, is that every note is important. In his earlier works, the important entity is often at the level of a gesture. For example, a dramatic statement or a flurry of a scale or a sustained motion of chord notes. In the late style, even gestures like these are entities where all the notes matter individually. The backbone of the first movement is a short, angry motive. It's being treated in a fugato manner, so with a countervoice and faster note values constantly battling with it in a contrapuntal struggle. So it's going back to the tradition of Baroque and especially Bach's music when they wrote counterpoint. So in that music, the unity of the music through a thematic subject was at the core, and the beauty lies in the way it's being treated formally and in a balanced way and efficiently and symmetrically and even mathematically. Now Beethoven fuses all this with his typical dramatic charge in this first movement. And after Beethoven, Brahms continues this tradition and he merges it with romantic ideals of subjective emotions to its fulfillment in Brahms' own way. Now I will read what the musicologist and pianist Charles Rosen says about the late piano sonatas in his book Beethoven's Piano Sonatas, a Short Companion. For all the consternation that the works of the middle period had aroused in critics and musicians, the sonatas of Opus 31 and the Wallstein and the Appassionata revealed themselves fairly quickly to be respectable concert pieces. It took almost a century for the last sonatas to reach the same status with the public. They are deeply serious works, but they do not seem to have, at first hearing, the forthright moral earnestness of the sonatas from the Pathétique to Les Adieux, largely because they make few concessions to the listener. Understanding them, taking pleasure in hearing them, requires an active participation from the listener never demanded before from the piano sonata. They have understandably inspired a good deal of pretentious interpretation in both writing and performance. This was inevitable. The composer clearly intended these works as exemplars of great spiritual experience. Now let's take a look at the form of the first movement so we get that in place straight away. We start with a slow and serious introduction, Maestoso. It's quite similar to the Pathétique Sonata, which is also in C minor with a slow introduction and Allegro subject. Then the Allegro section presents the motif a couple of times in different ways and leads up to the fugato section of the motif. Eventually the tension lets go and we get a fragment of a second subject, a cantabile melody in the high register with ornaments. But it lasts for a very short time, much shorter than a normal second subject in traditional sonata form. Instead it's interrupted by the core motif again, the struggle continues. The development is quite short, with a double fugue of the motif and growing tension that leads into the recapitulation, although with a sneaky start. And after the fugato section again, we get the second subject for a slightly longer slot than before, so it's developed more. And then we have the closing drama again and the coda to calm down and prepare for the second movement by ending in the light and open C major. Now let's take a look at all these places containing so much intense music. And I do a performance of this piece at the end of the video, so if you rather hear the music first, you can go and listen to that and then go back to the analysis, which comes now. So we start with these angry leaps in the left hand on a diminished chord. And I think you should play them with only the left hand. You shouldn't play like this. It's cheating. It's a horrible way to start a piece, but that's the gesture. It's in one hand. And then diminuendo. So we have these sudden dynamic changes from forte to piano, hesitating, and then exploding. It's Beethoven. Now we get the same leaps in another diminished chord. So we have that statement 2 times in a sequence. Now for the third time we get these notes, which this is slightly more stable chord, a dominant 6/4 chord. And we've actually had all 3 diminished chords. First this, and then. So this is important for the movement, that we have these 3 diminished chords in this order. For the third time. So kind of turning to major. Now we have this feature of the double dotted rhythm. And this is something you see in something that's called a French overture. So like in the Baroque music, I suppose they had an overture for an opera. They always had this dotted rhythm, kind of a majestic setting the scene. And this is what Beethoven does here as well. And you have these amazing harmonic shifts on this. Going to major, D flat major, but, and the bass, and stable again, but, and growing, and pumping these chords on straight 8th notes in the end. So great harmonies, but it's hard to find the perfect dotted rhythm and to feel it when you play it. But anyways, we get to the dominant here, G major, and we get these painful suspensions here. So it's so much going on in this bar. So the melody plays these on quarter notes. And that's a foreshadowing of when we get the motif. It's the upbeat. And we get chords to support it in the right hand. And then the left hand, the bass has a counter voice moving down. So those two together. And then in the middle we have the tenor voice is doing this G, pulsating like a timpani or a heartbeat. This upbeat goes to the tonic, C major, C minor, but then it goes to the dominant. So it's part of the introduction preparing for when the Allegro thing starts in C minor. So we end up on the dominant. And now once more in the lower register. it's so sensitive with all these voices going on. It's so hard to get it right, but it's really nice when you do. And G major, dominant, and now this is Jaws. So it's a trill with this chromatic interval in the deep register. And this grows seamlessly into the Allegro. So the tempo relations are like the beats on the eighth notes in the Maestoso section can be exactly the beats on the quarter notes in the Allegro section if you have the tempo exactly the same. But I want the Allegro section slightly faster, so I use these two bars to accelerate a little bit. And I think you can do either way. But it's hard to find like the perfect tempo for the slow introduction and the perfect tempo for the Allegro. But anyway, we get this growing here. So now we get the core motif stated in its barest forms in the low register. Fermata, and then again now the motif and the second part of it. And an echo. And now we just continue with this one voice in octaves down here, developing it a little bit on the 16th note. Going over the whole register, and then we get the motif with some chords. Finally we get a little bit of polyphony here. So immediately it's followed by this echo, and ritenente means kind of ritenuto light, and ritenuto means to play at a slower tempo for a brief time. It's different from ritardando, which is gradually slowing down. Ritenuto is slower for a little time, and ritenente is ritenuto light. And also this articulation, it's so much markings here. Articulation is called portato, and it's exactly what it looks like, a mix between staccato and legato. So staccato would be, and legato would be, so portato. It's this hesitant, uncertain, so it's like an afterthought here. So first it's without any marking, so but then Beethoven convinces us with its growing. And for the final cadence, we get the ritenente again and espressivo, so melodic here. And now we get to this fugato section, and it feels like a new presentation of the theme again. So we get this. And this is kind of the theme slightly transformed. So the core theme is, so with 8 notes, and now in the fugato section we have filled out this interval with 16th notes now, but it's the same notes. It's just slightly transformed, and together with this we have a counter voice in the left hand. When we get to the 16th notes, the left hand plays 8th notes. So these two voices are meeting and struggling and battling it out in this section, which is really fun to play. And I start much softer than forte, and then I grow gradually, building the tension. And it's basically a contrapuntal weave, but we have some points of fixation where we get an entry of the theme. So first we have it in this register, and then we get it in the bass. And then we get it in the high register. yeah, so let's just have it all now. And here we reach the climax. It's in D flat major and then the diminished tension chord. And we finally get some time to breathe here. The tension lets go. And this is actually the second subject that comes in. This very nice melodic. Now with ornament, these cool arabesques. And going back in energy even more, ritardando. And it goes down to an adagio for 1 bar. We get to really catch our breath. But Beethoven isn't done with us, unfortunately. We get interrupted with this diminished chord, and we have this scale upward starting in piano, and it says non-legato, but the way I play it is I press down the pedal and we get this amazing roar from the piano. It might not be orthodox way to play it, but this is how it sounds. Now we get the theme again in the left hand. And this is so cool, the motif in sequence. Going to the major, and the right hand plays these 16th notes. They're as accompaniment. 16th notes are like present all the time in this piece, and here it's in an accompaniment way. So together. And now flipping around, so we get the motif in the right hand in this pop hit fashion. And a kind of explosion of a manic person. And the left hand plays 16th notes accompaniment all over the place, so starting out here and up and down and ending up on the bass. And this is a very clear place for this idea that even though it's accompaniment texture of 16th notes, every note is important because it's still melodic, thematic in that way. It's so cool, and it's really a struggle here when the right hand plays up here. They're fighting on the edges of the register, and finally they end up in a chromatic scale, really crazy way. But let's go from the right hand theme. We have this Swedish pianist and professor Hans Paulsson. He's like a Beethoven specialist, and I had masterclass for him many times when I studied at the academy in Gothenburg. And he talks about Beethoven music and how it needs to feel like it's hard to play. It's supposed to be hard, and it's exactly in a place like this. And here is a repeat from the Exposition, so but let's skip that for now and let's move on. So here starts the development, and we're modulating a little bit. We're ending up in A flat major. which is a submediant. And I'm going to read a quote from Charles Rosen again about this modulation, how Beethoven moves on in the development, because he says it's so good. The development moves to the dominant G minor in the most laconic and efficient fashion. A soft offbeat octave G, a pause, and a brusque offbeat chord of the dominant are all that is necessary. So that's what we get here. Offbeat G, pause, and the dominant of the dominant, which is D major, and we're in G minor. And now we get this very ominous marching in really spectacular texture, just these bare octaves, four double octaves, and the motif, and we get the sequence. And so this is like the Hall of the Mountain King, or something is moving in the depth of Moria. And here Beethoven kicks off this double fugue. So a double fugue is basically a fugue with two subjects presented at the same time. So our main core motif we have in the left hand. It's on quarter notes and eighth notes. And then in the right hand we have this motif in half notes, which is the same contour as the motif. It's not the exact same intervals, but the contour is more important. So it's basically the motif in a new veil. So Beethoven puts these two versions of it together in a fugue like this. And then they're traded between the hands, so they get entries in new registers, and it's really exciting to watch this unfold. And here we reach like a forte, the tension is growing, and now we just get the motif pumping on diminished chord. Beethoven is tired of the fugue, so we get this, and the left hand has a constant G in the bass. It's a dominant pedal, but diminished chords above it. So. So this is the climax of the development, but it's also the start of the recapitulation in a kind of a sneaky way, because we have this dominant pedal. It doesn't feel like something is starting, but actually when we get the theme here, this is like the recapitulation starting, but then we get a second start in the tonic C minor, and like, how can it get even larger and bigger than when we had it before? Well, we have it in octaves in these registers. Octave down here and an octave up here. And this time we get a ritardando coming down. And then we get a new texture, a variation here with this offbeat, kind of weird place, but expanded a little bit, exciting. And this painful. And now the fugato section again, with the motif entering in the bass first. Now the motif in the really high. And now this whole fugato section is longer than it is in the exposition, so it's expanded, the struggle is lasting even more. And finally. Now the highest note on top here, in the score it actually says only a C. So it's... But there's a theory that it should be an E flat instead. If Beethoven just forgot to, like, he mixed up writing, how many extra lines are you supposed to write? 6 or 7. I mean, it's an easy mistake to just forget one, because in the Exposition, the same place, let's look at this. In the Exposition we have these notes in D flat major. So then we're going from this note up to another note, and then in the recapitulation it would make more sense, I think, to go up from the C, to go up in the interval to keep it similar. But it might have been a C, it's not totally clear, the science isn't settled on that point, but I prefer the E flat. And a nice second subject, and even more ornamentation now. And the adagio. A nice adagio for 2 notes or 3 notes. But now in the recapitulation, the second subject slot is longer, so it gets developed a little bit more. So now it turns to minor. And we get the subject in the left hand. It's this very nice sonority in piano, and like the not so much energy that keeps pumping everywhere else in the movement. And we just get these chords. And right hand takes over. And it's still just continuing the subject that we recognize. And now, so it's the same idea with this quintuplet as the ornamentation. But so the first time when we got here, we were interrupted with a diminished chord. But now it's like we're waiting for this interruption, but it doesn't come, so we get a little bit of hope. Wow! But crescendo and poi a poi sempre più allegro is more and more allegro. So basically getting back to a high allegro tempo. So this turns, like, the end result is inevitable. We're gonna get the hard diminished chord interrupting. So the hope only lasts for so long, but it's still a very cool place. These diminished chords, now they're too different. They're so bad position for the hand. It's so hard to play. And it's actually a place in the Mozart piano sonata, number 8 in A minor. In the first movement there, where we get to, after the second subject in the recapitulation, Mozart inserts this exact same texture of diminished chords going like this in the same way of 2 different chords. So Charles Rosen says that Beethoven is consciously or unconsciously still inspired by Mozart, because Beethoven was a big fan of Mozart, more in the early years when Beethoven started out, but this is in his late, he's still consciously or unconsciously picking up from Mozart. But of course Beethoven is even more dramatic. Then we get this roar scale from the piano again. Such a cool place. And now we get the rock and roll place. struggling. And now when we get to the end of the recapitulation, we get to pump these chords off beat, really getting it out there. And diminuendo. Now in the beginning I talked about these 3 diminished chords in a sequence. Here we have 3 diminished chords in the same sequence. So it's first this one. It's over a pedal of C in the bass, but diminished. This one, and this one, and this one. So it's a really cool link tying the movement together. And resolving to major, F major and F minor. So this is a coda, it's a pretty short coda. It's actually acting as a kind of transition to the second movement, because we're letting the energy go gradually and ending in C major. And we still have this accompaniment 16th notes in the left hand. Still melodic and every note matters. And the right hand has melodic chords. And together. And now there is a cool reference to this sonata and this place in Chopin's Revolutionary Etude, Opus 10, number 12 in C minor. So Chopin was a big fan of Beethoven, and he liked this sonata a lot because he referenced this place in the end of the Revolutionary Etude. You have the same things in right hand, these chords. And it's another place that Chopin's also referencing the beginning of this movement in Chopin's second sonata and the first movement there. The start is pretty similar to Beethoven. Chopin does something else with it also, of course, but it's cool links to know about. Okay, finally we end up here. Final tension chord diminished and resolving to C major. But it's really an ending that is a transition to the second movement. It's hard to make sense if you're only playing the first movement, what's the ending about? It's really positioned in the sonata as the pair preparing for the second movement. So now I will play the first movement from beginning to end, so you have a chance to follow the music as it's supposed to be, with all these things in the back of your head, hopefully. Thanks for watching Sonata Secrets. Check out my other videos, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and a special thank you and shout out to my Patreon sponsor A Philip in this episode. Yeah, that's it.